What's up and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm walking you through the making of my first full song on the Dirtywave M8. And it's not a masterpiece by any stretch, but it's a pretty good proof of concept for me to see, can I personally fit this into my workflow for making full tracks? And I think the answer is yes. And there are some tips and tricks I've picked up along the way that I'm going to show you, as well as just the general capabilities of the machine. All that being said, let's get into it. All right, so the version that you heard in the intro is the version where I've exported all the individual tracks, brought them into my DAW, and mixed them, added some processing, all that kind of stuff. Here's what it sounds like raw outside of the M8. Now, let's get into the individual elements. Starting off with the element that started the whole tune. So I've literally just got 4 instances of the same phrase, so it will loop for a full 4 bars. And it's a pretty simple little arpeggio with nothing too crazy going on in the sequencer. The fun bit comes with the sound design, which I did in the macro synth. The oscillator is triple saw, and this gives it its kind of phasey quality. And if I go up here, we've got both LFOs engaged. So the first one is moving the timbre, and right now I've got the amount turned all the way up. So let me turn this all the way down so you can hear what it's doing. That's where the sound really comes from. Then I've got just a little bit of modulation to the cutoff. That's moving a bit slower, as you can probably hear. So that is basically where the bulk of the sound comes from. And then I've got it sent pretty heavily to the chorus, delay, and reverb. And that's also doing a lot of heavy lifting here. This is really kind of the main star of the track. Let's be real here. Very simple. At its core, it's just one note being repeated over and over for all 16 steps, and then I've got multiple phrases that I could choose from and recombine into different chains. So I've got a dedicated chain of just the same note over and over and over again for 4 bars, and then a different chain for the full, admittedly quite simple chord progression. Once again, nothing crazy going on in the sequencer, it's all in the sound design. Wave synth in this case, and the oscillator is noise pitched. It's sent to the chorus a bit and the delay a tiny bit. These are my settings, and in this case, we've got some envelope movement and LFO movement. So the filter is a bit of a weird one. It's the wave low-pass filter, which is different than your standard low-pass filter. So let me turn the amount down. That's where the sound is really coming from. That plus the grit. So if I change this to your normal low pass, changes the sound a lot. It's kind of cool on its own actually, but that kind of bit crush sound is just great. I've also got the LFO sent to mirror a little bit, so let me turn that amount down. That's where that kind of swirling evolution is coming from. Up next, we've got layered with that, a bit more of a normal sounding bass. And this one is made pretty much how you'd expect. Macro synth, the shape is morph, and we've got a high cut filter with the cutoff being modulated by the first envelope, just like your standard bass pluck. And I've layered both of these together and then gone in and sidechained them to the kick and snare in post. Speaking of, this uses a bit of a trick. I loaded in a couple of samples where there's the kick by itself and then the kick and snare layer together as a separate sample. So then I can just alternate between them using the sampler instrument with 2 separate samples. Very sneaky. Up next, we've got the hi-hat and clap. And this is actually with the synth engine rather than samples. And this is one of the few cases where I used presets for both. So these both use macro synth, and they're essentially just filtered noise. And the clap is heavily sent to the delay, which is going a long way towards its groove and kind of filling everything out. Makes it feel like this track isn't monophonic, which is kind of nice. Here's our main lead. So it's fairly simple, and that's the thing with melodies. If you're trying to do it over multiple phrases chained together, you can actually hit play here, and it'll run through them, and so you can make edits as you go. And if you hit shift and play, you can hear everything together all at once, just right away. So that gives you some much needed context while programming stuff, but I still ended up with a pretty simple melody, partially because I just couldn't be bothered to try to come up with and program anything more complicated. That's a potential sticking point with this that I'm going to have to figure out how to get over, and I think that'll just come with time. But regardless, the main thing, of course, I want to walk you through is the sound design. So we got another macro synth. This is a self-made preset. So we've got the saw sync as our oscillator, and it's pretty simple. It's another just cut-off moving sound where we've got the low pass being modulated with a high decay. So if I turn up the cutoff, and I've got the resonance up a bit, which is doing quite a bit of work as well. Could take it even further. So that's kind of fun. And once again, a lot of chorus delay and reverb in this case. And now at this point, I found myself with 2 more tracks to play with, and I was kind of hitting the limit for layering ideas. So I decided to take the approach of making some pseudo chords, some 2-note chords. So both of these tracks are chord tracks. So another macro synth. This is all starting to look pretty familiar at this point, I bet. Low pass with the volume and cutoff sent to the envelopes. And then I've got the pan sent to the LFO a little bit. So it'll kind of warble back and forth, which is kind of fun. And then I'm using the exact same patch, just with a different set of notes so that they harmonize. And I've gone in and cut the lows a pretty good bit in post. And altogether, that's our track. So let's talk about fleshing this out into a full song, because there are some tricks that took me a second to get my brain around because they're not immediately obvious. But funny enough, Jeremy from Red Means Recording came to the rescue again. He always seems to drop a video on the Mate right when I'm needing to figure something out new with it. So he did a video showing some of these tricks, so I highly recommend you check that out. But regardless, a couple of tips that he mentioned are to have a blank pattern that you then feed into a blank chain. That way you can fill in the blank spots, because you always have to have something occupying every single slot in your song, like arrangement view. If you don't, it'll try to recombine different rows in ways that are potentially unexpected. Let me just demonstrate that. Wait for it. See it, how it skipped over that row for this slot here under 4? There needs to be a pattern in all of these slots for everything to just advance row by row, at least the way I would have expected. So it's a little hard to see on camera here, but all of these are full of my blank chain. And the other thing is that they're all 4 bars long. Even if, like this art bit, it's just one repeating pattern, I've made a chain, like I showed you earlier, with it repeated 4 times. That way, this whole row is full of 4-bar chains. This whole row is full of 4-bar chains, so on and so forth. So everything just advances every 4 bars down a row. Hopefully that makes sense. So like this row is full of a bunch of blank chains, and 4 instances of this pattern 01. And then this next one has both my bass elements and they all have their chains of 4 patterns, or the same pattern repeated 4 times, so on and so forth. The other tip I got was to make another blank pattern, or a very nearly blank pattern, as basically a kill switch, and that's this FD one right here. So there's nothing in here except for a note with a sampler with no sample loaded into it. And that will cut off the previous note because I wanted this arp to cut off right away. I didn't want it to ring out at all. And so this pattern acts as a kill switch for that. Super useful. And from there, this is a pretty simple musical idea. This is almost meant to be like background music for like a video or a video game or something. So I basically just built the idea up in stages, and once it had worn out its welcome, I ended the track, kind of wind it down. Just one idea stretched out into 2 minutes, and that's about it for my first track. Once again, it's kind of a proof of concept. And then I brought it into my DAW, added sidechain, EQs, compression, a bit of extra reverb, a bit of extra delay, and you get your final track. So once again, here's a longer section of what that sounds like. If you'd like to see my first experience with the Dirtywave M8, you can click or tap up over here. And if you'd like to see the process on a different hardware tracker, this time the Polyend tracker, you can click or tap down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.